The wind howled like a wounded beast across the Nevada desert, stripping the last warmth from the dying day. Dust curled in the fading light, dancing between the rusted ribs of cacti and the bleached bones of forgotten cattle. On a lone hill above the old mining road sat a weather-beaten cabin, its roof bowed and groaning beneath years of desert storms. Smoke rose from its crooked chimney, thin and ghostly against the deepening sky. Inside, the light from the fire flickered against walls lined with old tools and darker memories. Silas Greaves sat hunched in a wooden chair worn smooth by time. He stared into the flames, not for warmth, but because the fire reminded him of things that once were, of laughter echoing through this room, a child's barefoot steps, the smell of bread rising in the oven. Those days had blown away like everything else. Now only Rue, his old mare, remained faithful, grazing in silence outside among the scrub and sand. Silas rubbed the scar that ran from his left eye down into his beard, feeling the raised skin like a topographic map of regret. A bottle of rye rested on the floor beside him, untouched. He hadn't drunk in months. Not since the nightmares stopped clawing at him every night. Not since he made peace with the silence. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, barely a whisper beneath the wind. He didn't move. Might have been the storm playing tricks, or a tree branch tapping bone against wood. Then it came again, clear this time. 3 desperate raps. Silas rose, slow as an old bear, and reached for the rifle by the door. He cracked it open, barrel first, and narrowed his one good eye into the dusk. Lightning flared behind her. She stood barefoot in the dirt, soaked to the skin, clutching a torn kimono around her like a child clings to memory. Her black hair hung in ropes, face streaked with mud and blood, but her eyes cut clean through the storm. I need help, she said, voice trembling in the wind. Silas didn't answer. He didn't move. She swayed, as if waiting for judgment. Then her knees buckled, and she collapsed at his feet. He cursed under his breath, and stepped out into the rain. She was light as air, bones and skin. Her feet were raw, blistered, and her hands clutched a thin leather pouch, with white-knuckle desperation even in unconsciousness. He carried her inside, muttering to Rue to stay close. The mare snorted but didn't wander far. By the time the fire touched her skin, her body had gone pale. Silas wrapped her in a blanket and placed a tin mug of hot broth near her mouth. She sipped weakly, eyes flickering open, just enough for him to see they were almond-shaped and deep, almost golden in the firelight. "Thank you," she whispered. He said nothing, watching her from across the room like a man studying a rattlesnake with a broken thong. "My name is Aya," she offered, breath shallow. "I walked for 2 days. No food. They killed my mother." Silas remained stone, but the name tickled something. Not hers, his wife's. The way she'd said it once, reaching for their child with flour still on her hands. Asterisk, Aya. Asterisk. "I don't take in strangers," he said finally. I had nowhere else to go. She uncurled her fingers from the pouch, as if ready to give up even that. Silas hesitated, then gently pulled the pouch from her hand and set it on the table. It felt too light for coin. He didn't open it. Later, when the storm had passed and her breathing settled, she slept beneath his old army coat, curled tight like a field mouse. Silas poured himself a measure of rye and didn't drink it. Instead, he stared at the mantel. A cracked portrait sat there, half faded from sun and time. His wife in her wedding kimono, smiling with a sadness he never understood until it was too late. That same silk now clung in tatters to the girl sleeping in his bed. In the middle of the night, she stirred, crying out in a language he didn't understand. Her legs kicked, hands swiping at air. He touched her shoulder gently, and she gasped awake. "They found us," she murmured, "at the riverbed. My brothers tried to fight, but the man in the red scarf shot them like dogs." Silas said nothing. He had gold teeth, a burn across his throat, called himself Ezekiel Ray. The name dropped like a hammer in Silas's chest. The flames crackled louder now, or maybe it was just his pulse roaring in his ears. "I know that name," he said. She turned to him, eyes pleading. "He's looking for me. For this." She gestured weakly at the pouch. My father found something in the hills. Gold. The gang followed us after he died. They think I know where it is. Silas stood and walked to the door. Outside, the desert shimmered with the wet breath of rain, stars blinking between torn clouds. Ezekiel Ray. He hadn't heard the name in nearly a decade. Not since the raid on Ember Ridge. Not since he walked away from the blood-soaked remains of his own family. He had ridden with Ezekiel once, when the cause still felt just, before gold turned men into wolves. "You're not safe here," he said without turning. "I'll go," she answered, voice small, "when I can walk again." He wanted to let her, wanted her gone by dawn so he could return to his ghosts and his silence. But when he looked at her again, something inside him cracked. Not like a bone, clean and sharp, but like a dam, slow, inevitable. In the flicker of the firelight, her frightened face seemed younger. Or perhaps he just saw too much of his little girl in it. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn way of clenching her jaw when pain bit hard. He walked back to the hearth and sat across from her. "If you stay," he said, "you follow my rules. You don't touch my guns. You don't wander far. And you never lie to me." She nodded. He stared at the pouch on the table. He didn't ask what was in it. Not yet. But he knew it wasn't gold that would cause Ezekiel Ray to hunt a girl to the ends of the earth. The wind outside was dying down, but something colder was rising in its place. A current older than storms and deeper than revenge. Silas felt it in his bones. He looked at her again, this fragile ghost who'd knocked on his door like a curse. And for the first time in years, Silas Greaves loaded his rifle. The desert was quieter in the weeks that followed, but not peaceful. Silence clung to the hills like dust on a corpse, waiting, watching. Each morning, Silas woke before the sun rose and fed the fire, listening for hoofbeats that hadn't come yet, but would. He no longer thought of the girl as a guest. She was something else now, a tether to something lost, or perhaps something unfinished. Aya moved carefully through the cabin, her steps growing stronger. Her wounds were healing, though the ghosts in her eyes remained. She said little unless asked, and even then her answers came clipped, measured like someone who had learned that too much truth could get you killed. One morning as the sky bloomed red over the ridge, she sat across from him and opened the leather pouch that had never left her side. Inside was a piece of yellowed cloth, brittle at the edges. A map, hand-drawn, marked in an ink that looked black but smelled faintly of iron. Beneath it rested a small pendant on a leather cord, an aged wolf's head carved from obsidian, its eyes hollow. "My father made this," she said, voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "He was a miner, came from Nagasaki after the war, found gold deep in the Badwater tunnels. Told no one, but someone must have talked." Silas studied the map. The symbols weren't American. Some were Japanese characters he didn't understand, and others looked like minor shorthand. But the landmarks, yes, he recognized them. The bend in the ravine, the twin cypress stumps like sentries, the gulch that reeked of sulfur even in winter. "Ezekiel wants it," she said, "not because he needs it, but because it was my father's, and because it's the only thing that isn't his." Silas said nothing for a while. The fire popped between them. "I rode with him once," he finally said. "Years ago, before he started carving crosses into men's cheeks and hanging children from orchard trees." Aya's eyes rose. "They called us the Red Fangs," he continued. "Thought we were doing God's work, killing for cause, until Ember Ridge. That's when I learned what Ezekiel really was." He didn't tell her what happened that day. Didn't say how his wife had begged him to leave the gang months before, or how he'd sworn she'd be safe if she just stayed quiet. Didn't tell her about the moment he came over the rise and saw smoke rising from his own home. The broken window, the crib turned over, but the weight in his voice carried the bones of it. Aya reached across the table and placed a pendant in his palm. "I can't kill them," she said. "No," he said, "but I can teach you how." And so he did. Each afternoon, beneath the scorching sun, Silas lined up rusted cans on fence posts and taught her how to breathe through the trigger pull, how to keep both eyes open, how to aim not where the man was, but where he'd be. He gave her a Winchester carbine, cut down for someone her size, and watched her learn with a quiet determination that made something inside him ache. She practiced every day, bruising her shoulder, blistering her palms. He told her stories between lessons, not about glory, but about the cost, how the barrel never cooled fast enough, and how the echo of a shot stayed in your ears longer than the pain. One evening, as the horizon went purple with heat, she hit 5 cans in a row without flinching. Silas grunted approval. Aya said nothing, but a glint passed through her eyes that hadn't been there before. That night, the coyotes didn't howl. Silas woke to Rue's snort and the low, scraping groan of saddle leather from the canyon below. They were here. 3 riders, maybe more, moving slow, cautious. No torches, just shadows against shadows. He shook Aya awake without a word. She was on her feet in seconds, already sliding the carbine strap over her shoulder. They moved together through the cabin, grabbing what they'd prepared days before: tripwire, iron nails, oil-soaked rags, and 2 black powder charges Silas hadn't touched since the war. By moonlight, they slipped down into the canyon, where the dry creek split in 2. There, beneath a jagged outcrop, Silas laid the first trap, a false trail that ended in a pit filled with barbed stakes. Aya spread broken glass across the rock path and tied a length of gut line between 2 boulders, just above boot height. Then they waited. The riders came just before midnight. The first fell into the pit with a scream that turned into a gurgle. The second tripped the wire and fired blind into the dark, hitting nothing. Aya, crouched beneath a fallen log, steadied her breath and squeezed the trigger. Her shot cracked through the canyon like thunder. The man's body folded inward before hitting the ground. She stared at him. Even in death, he looked young, maybe younger than she was. Her hands trembled. The rifle dropped. Silas caught it before it hit the rocks. "It doesn't get easier," he said. "I don't want it to," she whispered. They burned the bodies in silence before dawn. The third man, wounded from a stray ricochet, had crawled 50 yards before Silas found him. He begged, called him Greaves like it was a curse. Silas didn't answer, just put a single round into his heart and kept walking. They didn't speak again until morning. Aya sat beside the fire, hands still stained, her eyes locked on the smoke rising over the hills. "I thought I'd feel safer after," she said. "You won't," Silas replied, "but you'll feel less powerless." She looked up at him, and something passed between them, wordless and real. It wasn't love. It was deeper. Silas walked to the mantel and took the portrait down. The frame was cracked. The image faded. He handed it to her. "She wore that same kimono," he said. Aya's fingers brushed the painted silk. She didn't ask questions, just nodded once, like a soldier honoring the dead. Later, as the sun climbed high and the cabin faded behind them, Silas looked back once, not at the home, but at the past that lived inside it. Then he turned toward the horizon. He wasn't riding out for revenge. He was riding for redemption, for the girl who reminded him of who he might have been if he'd chosen differently, for the family he couldn't save, and for the ghosts who still followed a shadow, waiting to see if he'd finally finish what he started. The morning they rode to Hollow Point, the sky broke open with gold. Dust curled behind their horses like smoke trails, and neither Silas nor Aya spoke a word. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was sacred, like the hush before a burial, or the pause before a final confession. The sun glared off the rocks, painting everything in blood-colored hues. Ahead, the canyon waited like an open mouth. They came from the east, down the switchback paths only old scouts knew. Hollow Point Canyon stretched wide and deep, its walls sheer as cathedral stone, rising red and ochre into a sky too big to hold the weight of memory. Wind whipped through the narrow hollows, carrying the scent of gun oil, horses, and firewood. Somewhere below, the red fangs lay curled around their stolen treasure like a nest of vipers. Silas stopped his mare at a rise, lifting his spyglass. Below, scattered between the canyon walls, the gang had built a makeshift camp of tents and wagons. They lounged with rifles across their knees, their laughter too loud, too careless. Near the far end, where the cliff face split into a natural vault, gold glinted under canvas, a mound of it, guarded by 2 men with shotguns and hollow eyes. And at the center of it all, standing like rot in the middle of fruit, was Ezekiel Ray. He looked older than Silas remembered, but no less mean. Burned scars clawed up his neck into his jawline, twisting his grin into something that didn't belong on a human face. He wore a long red scarf around his neck, same as always, now faded like the blood of those he'd left in the dust. Aya crouched beside Silas, clutching the edge of the rock. "That's him," she whispered. He nodded. "You remember the plan?" She didn't answer, just slid the small derringer into the top of her boot and pulled her kimono tighter around her frame, making herself look smaller, weaker. It was the same silk her mother had died in. Now it was a weapon. The descent was silent. Silas took the ridge, weaving through thorn brush and boulders, his long rifle slung across his back, a coil of dynamite tied at his belt. He moved like a shadow, careful not to dislodge even a pebble. Aya rode forward alone, hair unbound, arms raised, a white rag tied to her saddle horn. The men in the camp looked up slowly, first with surprise, then with confusion. Some chuckled. Others reached for guns out of instinct. Ezekiel stepped from the shade of a canvas lean-to, eyes narrowing as he walked to meet her. "Well now," he drawled, looking her up and down. "Ain't you a ghost come walking? Thought you were buzzard food by now." Aya said nothing. "Where's your map, girl? Where's the man who's been picking off my boys like flies on a carcass?" She held up her empty hands. "I came alone," she said. "No more running. I'll give you what you want." He grabbed her chin, tilting her face toward the light. "You look just like your daddy. Same damn defiance in your eyes." He squealed like a stuck pig, though. "Let's see if you do." She didn't flinch. Ezekiel barked an order. Two men tied her wrists, though not too tight, just for show. They dragged her toward the vault. High above, Silas steadied his rifle on a ledge and pulled the trigger. The first shot hit a lookout in the throat. He dropped without a sound. The second took a man through the shoulder, sending him spinning into a fire pit. By the time the camp reacted, Silas had disappeared behind the rocks again, loading and moving like smoke. Panic spread. Bullets ricocheted uselessly off stone as they fired into shadows. The Red Fangs, so bold when killing farmers and travelers, now scrambled like frightened cattle. Aya used the chaos. As the guard beside her turned to shout, she twisted her boot and slipped the derringer into her palm, hiding it beneath her sleeve. Ezekiel grabbed her arm and dragged her into the vault, toward the gold pile. He shoved her to the ground. "You think this ends with a hero riding in," he hissed. "Ain't no heroes left out here. Just thieves and ghosts." "Then you should be afraid," she said, voice low. He pulled a knife from his belt and crouched beside her, pressing the tip to her throat. "Call your friend," he growled, "or I start carving memories." A shadow shifted at the edge of the vault. Silas stepped into view, his coat flapping in the canyon wind, rifle slung, but not raised. "Easy, Zeke," he called out. "You want what's in the map pouch. I got it." Ezekiel's face twisted. "Silas Greaves," he spat. "You're supposed to be dead." "I was," Silas said. "But you never did finish things right." Ezekiel pressed the knife harder. "Throw it over." Silas reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a folded parchment. Aya didn't move. Not yet. He tossed it forward. It fluttered through the air, landing just out of Ezekiel's reach. "Let the girl go," Silas said. "Take the map. Leave with your life." Ezekiel barked a laugh. "You think I'm that dumb?" "No," Silas said. "I think you're greedy. That's worse." As Ezekiel stepped toward the map, Aya moved. In a blink, she twisted, dropped to her side, and fired. The derringer's shot cracked sharp and sudden. Ezekiel stumbled back, clutching his throat as blood poured between his fingers. He made a sound like he was trying to laugh, but all that came was choking. He hit the ground beside the gold, eyes wide, staring at nothing. Silas ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. "You all right?" She nodded once, then twice more, as if convincing herself. "I didn't miss." "No," he said. "You didn't." By morning, the canyon was silent. The Red Fangs were gone. Those who hadn't died had scattered into the desert like roaches. Silas buried the bodies himself, one by one, beneath the shadow of the cliff. He didn't speak. Aya helped carry stones. when the gold pile remained, untouched and glinting in the dawn light. Silas took the dynamite from his belt and set it around the base. Aya didn't ask why. She only lit the fuse. The explosion echoed for miles, a rolling thunder that stirred the sky. Later, as they rode away from Hollow Point, the canyon shrinking behind them like a closed wound, the sun broke over the ridge in full. They didn't look back. In towns up and down the frontier, stories would be told of the day the Widowmaker rose from his grave and rode against the Red Fangs. Some said he came for blood. Others said it was for love. But only two souls knew the truth. He rode not to kill, but to forgive himself. And the girl beside him? She wasn't a child anymore. She was proof that even in a land of bones and betrayal, something good could still rise from the ashes.